It's day one of a new meta. Let's take a look at some of the decks that are dominating High Infinite. First up is a Magus deck from Big Baby. Now, this is a list that I think a lot of people will be surprised to see, but one of the most impactful changes in yesterday's OTA, if not the most impactful change, is that Magus is just a real card now. This is a card you will actually start to consider as a functional member of society as opposed to the stay inside shut-in that he was previously. This is suddenly a card that you actually start to think about. A lot of what he's doing is looking for two things: decks where you can use him as a backup plan, i.e. decks where the card text is incredibly important, but it is not an on reveal or an activate, but your deck falls apart if you don't have it. Or decks that you are already looking to skip energy in, and he can duplicate and get free roll value with those. This is more of the first, or more of the second, I should say, but there are some elements of the first here, which is to say that this is a deck that is looking to use Magus, say, to copy an Iron Man in the deck, and then since Magus costs 2, it'll be duplicated by a Moonstone, things of that nature. Weirdly, what feels like the most important card in this deck is actually Luna Snow. Just gives you a lot more control over how you can make up for the fact that you are skipping a certain amount of your turns. But to be honest with you, a lot of the time using Magus to copy an Iron Man is going to be better than playing the Iron Man. You will run into situations where you'll be like, damn, I really wish I didn't draw that Iron Man. I would have won this game if I didn't draw that Iron Man and I was able to copy it. But Magus can also copy staples like Victoria Hand and Moonstone. So this deck is in a really good spot in terms of having really good targets for the deck and also being able to be a deck that wants to skip energy. I think you'll see this a lot in sort of how you build around Magus if you were to build around him as a specific card. But generally, the big thing this guy is doing is when you're putting ongoings together like they're puzzle pieces and the solved puzzle is you having 150 power in multiple lanes, that's the guy who gives you a backup puzzle piece. He's a little bit like a wild card in Uno, basically. From Smiz, a list I'm calling the Magus Arms because it sounds like an old-timey tavern and I just got done watching A Night of Seven Kingdoms. Now, this is a very interesting list that is using Magus almost wholly to replicate the things that you didn't draw. This list exists to do stuff like play a Moonstone on the Magus lane and then copy a Sarah, right? Like that kind of stuff. Oh, I have Magus down. I have Moonstone in the Magus lane. I am going to activate the Magus to go get a Sarah. Suddenly, I have double Sarah going into turn 6, and it doesn't actually matter that I don't have any of the things that I would otherwise need to win a game with a deck like this. Oh, I didn't draw my magic. It's okay. I've got this, right? The other thing it can do is in the event that you need to copy an Onslaught, you can go out and fetch that in your Magic games, right? Like when you've done your Magic thing, okay, sometimes you don't have the Onslaught. This is a deck that is a perfect example of a deck that Magus actually really wants to go in because he is able to do this thing. So I guess we talked about two specific spots that Magus fits in, but there is one other that's really worth specifically pointing out, and it's that this guy and Moonstone is a really interesting thing. Like, the fact that he costs 2 and you can use him to put ongoings that would otherwise never get affected by Moonstone under a Moonstone is a really big deal. That kind of stuff is really, really interesting, and those are the kind of edge cases that can potentially break cards. Largely, this is a deck that is trying to do one thing with a lot of consistency. So it really wants a card in there that can be a split card between a bunch of different things. Whichever one it's missing, Magus will go be that. But ongoings are also specifically good with Magus because they typically just don't really care about their own power in a meaningful way, so you're not giving up as much when you go and copy an Onslaught. Oh no, I copied an Onslaught. Oh god, it's so horrible. Okay, I'm okay with that. It's fine. I'm glad that I copied the Onslaught. I'm not giving up. Oh, I missed up on 8 power in my game where I'm going to have 400. You just don't care, right? And so that's the big thing that I wanted to highlight about Magus. This card is really, really interesting now and probably long-term the more impactful of the things that happened yesterday. This is Jaywalla's Magus C3 list, although I have a strong suspicion that just playing normal C3 is going to be a little bit better than building around Magus. The biggest problems that Magus creates are that C3 has a lot of cards that are actually going to cost 3, and it's not like it's a bad idea necessarily to have a card in there that in those situations where you don't draw Cerebro and you know Magus will go get Cerebro, it'll be a Cerebro if you need it. That's not a bad thing to have the option to do. It also allows you like some latitude with bluff snaps and things of that nature. It makes your opponents think twice about staying. It's definitely like a real aspect of what the deck can do. But when you actually try to build around him, as seen here, you kind of end up giving stuff up. You give up Mystique, sometimes you give up Loot Cage, you build in a different way, and that's a pretty awkward thing to ask, unfortunately. Largely, I think that if Cerebro 3 is good now, it's going to be good because it was already good. Look at what we have in this deck, and then look at what we had previously. I'm not particularly convinced Magus is a value add here. I think that like there is definitely a real case that the extra building around him that is being done is making the deck a little bit worse. That said, I do think it's reasonable, and I think Cerebro 3 was already pretty good. Let's talk about Star-Lord. I think it's pretty clear that the general community consensus with Star-Lord was they didn't do enough here. And I gotta tell you, it kind of feels like they did something. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and say like, parsing the definition of enough. But what I will tell you is the highest ranked Star-Lord gamer that I know, Honifer, came back to me after playing a bunch of Star-Lord on day one and was like, no, this actually was more impactful than I thought it would be. There is a meaningful difference in how my win-loss feels right now. When I win by less, and people are more able to beat me because they are able to understand what I'm doing, and I am a weaker deck that understanding previously didn't matter as much against. I think that that kind of thing is relevant. I wouldn't be surprised if this card was still really, really strong, though. It's just a little bit more limited. And I'm a little less confident in the other Star-Lord builds. Like, I guess I just don't know right now, day one, what the Star-Lord build around deck looks like exactly. I don't feel nearly as confident playing the stock list. I don't feel nearly as confident playing the Honifer list. The stock list can still do stuff, and by stock, I mean like, you know, the one with the Zola and the Eliath and all of that stuff, the Fin Fang Fooms. It'll still win when you do that, but like you really are starting to hurt for points when you don't draw Mr. Foom. Like it is actually quite noticeable that like, oh, I don't have Mr. Fin Fang Foom. I'm really not doing a lot in that deck anymore. Like you really start to notice how much that guy is carrying the deck at this point when you've lost the points off the Star-Lord stuff. Like that is why negative is here, because I think it's very likely there is a better Star-Lord deck out there. But right now, I think this is the best Mr. Negative deck out there. And I think that that's worth talking about. Why is this the best Mr. Negative deck out there? Because it effectively has a second Negative Jane. It's worse, but it's there. The big thing about Mr. Negative that I think the player base at large tends to misunderstand is that when a card gets better in Mr. Negative, they typically refer to it getting better on the back end. Oh, Star-Lord got better in Mr. Negative because now when you play Mr. Negative, he's going to be a little bit better. That's not why. Star-Lord is decent in Mr. Negative because he's your second Mr. Negative for when you don't draw Mr. Negative. The biggest buffs Mr. Negative can ever get as an archetype are more access to its combo draws. And Star-Lord Zola, while not nearly as ridiculous as something like Mr. Negative Jane Foster, is still a very viable game plan. And even Star-Lord just waiting until turn 5 to play him is still a more viable game plan than every other thing you would be doing when you didn't have Mr. Negative. So what this deck is allowing you to do is just play more games of actual Marvel Snap that are actually close and competitive, and then you still have all the typical Mr. Negative stuff locked into it. I do think this is the best build of Mr. Negative, and if you want to be playing a day one scam your opponent's combo deck, I think that's what it looks like. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a better build of Star-Lord out there, but the typical builds are not feeling particularly phenomenal for me right now. Now, that said, it is very much a high elo thing. Like, the people in my elo are going to be better at beating Star-Lord. It might be why they don't feel so great for me right now. But I can only tell you what my experience is. That is all I can do. And all I can say is I think I'm willing to withhold judgment on exactly where Star-Lord is at for at least a couple days. That's what I'll say. Get back to me when it's like, half the top 16 in the Golden Gauntlet, which is extremely possible. But I do think that I was a little taken aback. Like, I thought it would be meaningful. I was a little taken aback at, like, the combination of how good people are against the deck at High Infinite and the fact that now if you aren't doing this, you're just, like, really getting railed is notable to me. A deck that I really wish they had nerfed, and likely a frontrunner for future best deck in the game, is, of course, Show Stomper. This list has not changed, which it might actually have to. Like, right now, what's happening is a lot of people are playing Cerebro stuff. They're doing, like, weird ongoing combo decks. This deck still doesn't have the greatest point output in the game. What makes this deck so strong is that it sits on top of all of the mid-range decks and can customize itself to beat certain aspects of combo decks. And what I mean by that is whatever the popular combo decks or things it's seeing are, you usually have like 2 slots in this list that you can mess around with. Right now, it's still on Mercury and Cosmo, in deference to Star-Lord and the Mirror. But there are other cards you can play there that will give you points in other matchups if you're seeing a lot more of those. And I think it's worth pointing that out. Part of what makes this deck so strong is not just that it is a deck that has a lot of points, but that it's a deck that can adjust over time. It's not a static output deck. It is a deck that is able to change how it plays and where its points are and what cards it's playing a lot easier than a lot of other decks can. If Fin Fang Foom gets nerfed off the planet, well, the Star-Lord deck kind of disappears. But this deck can stand losses by swapping other cards in, and that's what makes it so powerful. It's a core of resilient scalers: Batroc, Sam Wilson, Kraven the Hunter, and of course, everyone's favorite Hydra Stomper, mixed with a combo scaler, Shou Lao and Maverick, mixed with some other very strong and powerful cards that also still somehow has room to tech for various matchups. This deck is going to, as long as the answers are high quality enough, continue being a threat. The only question is if there are decks that can ignore what the threats this deck is presenting are. Killmonger decks are pretty good at that, for example. Killmongering a Batroc, quite solid, or anything that goes over the top. And if there are decks that can present threats that this deck is currently not able to exist and deal with. Like, C3 is pretty great against this deck. It can do a lot of damage. Things that are able to have things that aren't really interacted with by Mercury and Cosmo is really sort of where you want to be at, right? The Arms deck does pretty well here too. Living Tribunal does pretty well. That kind of stuff is a very viable way of beating this. But until I see it happen, I'm just going to assume that some version of this, customized for whatever metagame you want to see, is going to be a really good decision on ladder. One aspect of Marvel Snap that has lain dormant for a while is clog, and I think it is a nice day one solution for metagames full of weird stuff. Everything we've talked about has kind of been combo-y, right? Like, we've been talking about Star-Lord and Mr. Negative, and even Shou Lao is a little bit combo-y in the world where Maverick is doing what Maverick is doing. But this kind of deck is built to deliberately assail those kind of decks. People talk about the tech apocalypse as sort of the growth of why combo is so much of the metagame in Marvel Snap right now. And I do think it's also worth talking about why the death of clog is a big part of that as well. Because this deck is a natural predator against combo decks that care about their board space because they're doing something ridiculous with it. Oh, you're playing an Onslaught deck. It'd be a shame if you couldn't use the spaces that the Onslaught wanted to go in. It'd be a shame if someone filled that up. These kind of decks are particularly lethal against those things. And we are entering a metagame where even though clog has been nerfed and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed, I mean, for the love of God, we're playing White Widow and Armor. This is still the kind of strategy that is so naturally built to deal with what people are doing that you can kind of just get away with it. This is, I think, a bit of a missing piece in the discourse because everyone wants to say it was like Shang-Chi keeping combo decks in check because they kind of liked him a little bit. No one really likes clog, right? I think it's worth acknowledging the role clog played in the metagame. Now, does it suck and is it awful? Yes, absolutely. I think that when you look at the combination, the decision making that they have exercised in the last year or so, you could see a strong move away from things that tell your opponent that they can't do something and a strong move toward proactive and powerful game plans. Largely, that is expressed in my content by a move away from tech and clog and to combo-oriented gameplay. That seems to be an intentional choice. But we have gotten so far down that road that even like just Titania Green Goblin is kind of game winning a lot of the time now. Like people just aren't used to dealing with it. And there definitely are decks that can. Like specifically the Kitty Pryde Sholau move deck. That's a deck that if you're on your toes, you will be able to deal with clog in a meaningful way. But if those cards start going over there, suddenly your moves start getting drastically restricted. Your Batroc isn't getting the points, all of that kind of stuff. This deck is not good. I don't want to like be like, oh, clog is busted now. I think that is the purview of other YouTubers. But I just think it's worth talking about the role a deck like this plays in the metagame, even when it's kind of bad, when the metagame is like this. It might sound a little bit weird, but with the relative decrease in Star-Lord stuff, I'm seeing a little bit less of it, enough that I'm now sort of wondering like, okay, do I need more general answers? This is, of course, the Daredevil Cosmo list, but instead of Daredevil, the Supergiant's back in. Why? Because I don't know if Daredevil, which is specifically hard targeted at Cosmo, is going to be good enough if all these people are doing like Cerebro crap, basically. Like that's kind of the extent of it, right? Like the Daredevil exists as an extension of your Cosmo. That exists so you could beat Star-Lord. If people are doing all this weird ongoing crap, I need to stop them from doing that. I need the guy playing Tribunal to not have a Sarah. I need all of this kind of stuff to stop. I need it to go away. And so the Supergiant is back in here. And this is, I think, just like a pretty straightforward build that you could also just play normal Supergiant over, like totally valid here. But I do think that there's a couple of interesting things going on here that are worth discussing. The first is the Supergiant thing that we talked about. And the second is that this package of Batroc stuff is so damn good. Like I keep seeing people talking about how, oh, you know, it's not that busted. And like, I don't think it's busted in the same way that like a Star-Lord is busted, but it's a bit like looking at old Angela and looking at Mr. Negative and being like, well, Mr. Negative is clearly more busted. It's like, yeah, no, the impact is. But over a large enough sample size, this is just that much better than the other mid-range shells to the point that it starts to become excluding. And that's sort of really what I talk about when I talk about Batroc and I talk about Sholau, is just like, they're just enough better than everything else in the same space that it becomes hard to come up with something to do in that space that doesn't involve them. And that's sort of what I'm trying to express here.
This deck from Ica is okay. You can play this and not embarrass yourself. I've been KMBest.
Thanks to my boy Ika for that assist. This is the list that he sent in. I think it is a very reasonable attempt at playing what I think you would describe as fair Magus. My worry, of course, is the F word, right? Fair. This is a deck that is reasonable at dealing with mid-range decks. It will not embarrass you, as shocking as that may be. But there are going to be just decks that are just way bigger than it. It is an interesting thought exercise, in my opinion, because you have this deck that's like, okay, here are all of my discounts. Here are all of my stats. The baseline thing that I'm trying to do is play Magus into Warlock, into Moon Girl, skip 5, activate everything, play a zillion cards. That's kind of sick nasty. And it is actually kind of sick nasty. I even like the Starhawk. Like there's just a lot of good stuff going on here. But a card I specifically want to call out is Elektra, who's really gained some high infinite praise in the last few weeks, blowing up not just things like Batroc, but also, you know, the output of a Deadpool on the final turn of the game if your opponent has priority, or even things like Sunspot and Jim Hammond out of the more typical Star-Lord decks. That gives this deck a bit of more surprise power, and the combination of Jack Flag and Starhawk, it's not as good as having a second hit monkey, but it's not bad. This is also a deck that can do more points than you think. It definitely borders on the unfair when it gets its good draws. Some really ridiculous She-Hulk Warlock discounts are extremely possible here. The numbers this deck can put out are big, and it is a straight up point output on turn 6 machine. You are counting on nobody playing Mobius, but that's okay. Nobody plays that card. You're fine. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.